So our speakers tonight are colleagues from the University of Colorado Boulder here in town, Kearns and Diana Oliveras. They have been studying front range pollinators since 2001. I think most of that time together. I think they've been studying pollinators individually for even longer. Carol's PhD is in pollination ecology, and Diana's in plant and insect mating systems. And I have known about their work for a long time because they have been faculty members in the university's residential academic program, which is a really nifty program where students are living in sort of learning communities, taking classes together. And so it affords some small group interactions with faculty, and it's the people who teach in that program are typically tend to be really into teaching and really into students, and students have a terrific time. So it's a neat program. They have been working together on front range pollinators in suburban, agricultural, and grassland areas. So know a lot about the conservation of these species, what we need to do to keep them live and well and ample. And they have their recent work caught our eye when they gave a workshop last summer for the Colorado Native Plant Society, and someone suggested that we get them to come talk to us too. And so we have done that. You will hear from them shortly. And I will just make that point that if you see a good speaker or miss a good speaker that you'd like to hear from, we're always happy to receive your ideas for programs on the programs committee. So you can just send those to Boulder Audubon, and those ideas are really helpful to us in knowing what's interesting around and about. So without further ado, I will also say that they do lots of things besides pollinators. When I poked around, singing, hockey, doing obedience training with dogs. So they have a lot of interest besides bees, but they are going to convince you tonight that bumblebees are the charismatic megafauna of insect pollinators. And I turn it over to them.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Thank you, all of you, for welcoming us here. Carol and I are excited to chat with you about pollinators. Let me start. This is a bee. This is a bumblebee. This is actually a queen of the species Bombus huntii that I took a picture of when she was foraging in the ribes, our currant bush in our backyard. And so a lot of people, I think of insects such as bees, and you should, when it comes to pollinators. But I want to point out that there are lots of different kinds of pollinators. There are over 1,000 species of vertebrate animals that serve as pollinators. We have mammals. Where's Karen? There you are. Yeah, we got mammals, we got lemurs in Madagascar, we have squirrels, we have mice that can serve as pollinators. There are birds. Everyone knows about the hummingbird, and there's honey creepers, and there's a white-winged dove that is important in pollinating saguaro cactuses. So if you like songs from the 70s, you'll recognize that. There's lizards and geckos are also been known to pollinate, but honestly, the vertebrate ones are more unusual. They're more fun because they're rare. I'll turn this light off, or do you want it on? Off is fine. I think off is fine. We'll make it work. We also have a lot of invertebrate pollinators, and that's what most people are familiar with. There's a picture of an Aphrodite butterfly here, right above my little hummingbird, and there's a little gecko on the other side. So most people think of invertebrates. There's 100,000 species of pollinating invertebrates. They include things like the butterfly that you just saw, the moths. There are flies. We have 3 pictures of flies here. Flies aren't necessarily thought of as pollinating insects. Probably most people, not in this room, of course, but most people will probably thinking of flies as the things that circle around your meat, spoiling it and such. But they're really important many species are really important in pollinating the flowers at the high elevations, like say the alpine tundra. So they're important for maintaining diversity of flowers. They're also important in maintaining, in helping with some agricultural crops, like there's cacao that we make chocolate out of, and there's mango. There's just a suite of agricultural crops that are pollinated by flies. And then from an evolutionary standpoint, it's thought that flies were one of the earliest pollinators of plants. Just, from a historical evolutionary perspective, that's kind of cool. Mosquitoes. Who would have thunk mosquitoes, right? But male mosquitoes like nectar. Male mosquitoes are like the hippy dippy kinds of guys, and they're going after the sweet sugar, man. The females they need the blood meal because they need that protein in blood to help make their eggs and raise young. But the male here, this is a male mosquito on a Colorado native orchid. This is a habenaria orchid, and it has, there's a thing here. It has a pollinia here. This is a little bag of pollen from that orchid. So even though, he may not be actively searching for pollen, he could accidentally get one stuck on him and carry it to the next orchid and maybe deposit it there and do a little bit of pollination.
So before you smash your next mosquito, make sure you look.
Yeah. The most important pollinators, though, are bees. Oh, okay, I'll do it.
Okay. Okay, so there are 20,000 species of bees. And just for comparison's sake, there are about 8,600 species of birds globally and 3,500 species of mammals. So we are talking about a tremendous amount of diversity. And the thing that all bees have in common is that they are totally dependent upon flowers for food. And adult bees take nectar, but they also collect pollen, and they collect pollen because they're feeding that to the larvae. So when a bee lays an egg, she is also going to provide some pollen next to that egg. So when the egg hatches and the larvae emerges, there's food present for the bee. So they are completely tied to flowers. So unlike wasps or flies or other insects or the other types of pollinators, they are considered to be the superior pollinator because everything in their life depends upon interacting with flowers. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. It's on this side. Backwards from my computer. Okay. So bee diversity in Colorado, there's 946 species of bees in Colorado.
These are the shock and awe numbers.
Yes. And you're probably, you being birders and people out in nature, I'm sure that you're familiar with honeybees and bumblebees and sweat bees, but there's a tremendous amount of diversity. And I'll show you a few pictures just to give you an idea of some of the things that you might see around here. But when we talk about diversity, well, first of all, Colorado is the 5th highest in bee species richness among the states. And the other states that are important, well, between Arizona and Utah, there's kind of a war because bee biologists continue to look. Each one claims to be the highest in bee species richness, but they're in competition for that. But Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico are ahead of Colorado, but we have a tremendous amount of diversity because of the diversity in habitats that we have in Colorado. Even in our county, there are 562 species of bees. And when I talk about bee diversity, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the honeybee life cycle, and you've probably seen honeybee hives around your neighborhood, or you've gone to museums where you can actually look for the queen inside a glass colony. But honeybees and bumblebees are unusual in that they do form colonies. 85% of bee species are actually solitary. And when I say solitary, what I mean is they find an appropriate nest for that species. The female who has been fertilized by a free-flying male lays an egg, puts some pollen next to that egg, and then usually forms some kind of a compartment and she can make a partition so that she can lay another egg. And the partitions vary from clay, mud, plant hairs, leaves from leafcutter bees. So there's a variety of different types of partitions. And the female will lay a series of eggs in this nest and then leave, and that's it. So 85% of bees are solitary, but there are also communal species where they nest together in the same habitat. And then there are semi-social species where sisters may cooperate to some extent, where some are laying the eggs and some are going out and collecting pollen and nectar, but there is no overlap of generations. Once those eggs are laid, everything is finished. So the colonies of honeybees and bumblebees are the exception rather than the rule. So just to give you an idea, these are some bees that you might find around here, but there's a very great difference in bee sizes. So the smallest bees are about 2 millimeters long, and the biggest ones are more like over an inch, like these queen bumblebees that you may see in the spring that are over an inch long, and they look like little flying helicopters. And with the differences in sizes, body sizes, there's also a tremendous difference in tongue length. And so the tongue length is important in that it allows the bee to forage for nectar. And if the bee has a very short tongue length, it can only visit flowers that have nectar right close to the surface. And if the bee has a very long tongue, they can go to flowers that have a deep corolla tube, and the nectar is kind of enclosed at a deeper level. So there's a difference in length. There's a 3,000-fold difference in mass of bees. And just to give you an idea of some of these local bees, the osmia up on the left is called the blue orchard bee, very important in pollinating orchard crops. That's a bee that makes mud partitions or clay partitions between the individual eggs that it lays, and it actually will carry mud in its mandibles to make its nest. The two sweat bees pictured here are among the more colorful metallic sweat bees, the Ogochlorella and the Agapostemon, that have this bright metallic green. Deanna and I actually decided at one point we were going to make a line of clothing with metallic green tops and striped bottoms.
They'd make good pajamas.
But those are sweat bees, and they have a tongue length of somewhere from like 3.5 to 5 millimeters. And so they're visiting flowers that don't have a very deep corolla tube. This Anthidium, also known as a Carter bee, actually scrapes hairs off of plant leaves and collects resin from conifers. And it makes a nest, and between the partitions between the individual eggs are lined with plant hairs. The Sphacoda, let me do the Ceratini here first. This is just a tiny little bee that you might find around here, which is 6 millimeters in length, so very short tongue length. And this is Sphacodes with the bright red abdomen, is a parasitic bee. And a parasitic bee, just like parasitic birds like cowbirds or cuckoos, basically all the individuals are reproductives. There are no workers, and they lay their eggs in other bees' nests so that all the pollen is provided by the other bees. They don't have any apparatus for even collecting pollen. And this over here is one of our favorites. This is Pompous affinis, and it is has a tongue length of 24 millimeters. So compare that to a bee that's only 6 millimeters. So most of you are familiar with honeybees and probably bumblebees, and you've seen them carrying these balls of pollen on specialized structures on their legs called corbicula. So they collect the pollen, they brush it off themselves, and they pack it into these balls and carry it back to the nest to provision the larvae. But other bees do other things. So this megachilid over here actually has lots and lots of hairs on its belly, and it packs pollen on its belly. This Melisodes has extremely hairy legs, and it packs the pollen in those hairs. And this lasioglossum also has very hairy legs, but the individual hairs are actually spiraled so that they can catch the pollen. And individual bees have been shown to carry as many as 15,000 pollen grains.
Bumblebees, though, the charismatic megafauna of the insect world. They are so adorable. There's about 260 species of bumblebees worldwide. I had it written down. See if I can see it in my notes. I look in it because I didn't write this down. There are 46 species of bumblebees in North America, and specifically north of Mexico. This is information from Xerces, the insect conservation organization. And Boulder County has 23 of those species. So this is another shock and awe, like, wow, we have such a rich assortment of different species of just bumblebees. We wanted to give you a sense of where these bumblebees originally came from. A lot of work has been done on finding like the origins, and a lot of folks think about honeybees and they think, oh yeah, they're from, Eurasia, Europe, Asia. They came over from to North America. Bumblebees are thought to have originated in Asia as well. They moved to Europe. So this is supposed to be Asia. Can you see the faint lines here? Imagine them. This is Asia, and that is Europe, and this is maybe the Asian subcontinent, and then this is the Bering Sea, and this is North America and South America. And it's unfortunate that you can't see the numbers, but the red-orange numbers indicate really high numbers of species. So like upwards of 70 species for the really deep ones. And then as you move toward the paler red, yellow, and then blue, greens, and white, there are fewer species. So you can see that there's a tremendous number of bumblebees in Europe and in Asia and in Europe compared to North and South America. And it's thought that the migration occurred in a pattern maybe like this one. There's two main groups of bumblebees. There's the lowland grassland bumblebees, and those are indicated in green. And then there's the montane grassland group. And what this figure is attempting to show is you've got these groups that moved toward Europe from Asia. And then there was also movement across to North America. And you do have movement into South America, but there's fewer of them. Long story short, bumblebees originated in temperate climates, not in the tropics. And this may play a role in their success in the future with the threats that they're facing. So that's something to keep in mind. But now we're going to go on to a cool topic.
Okay, so the bumblebee life cycle, they're colonial, and basically what happens is in the spring, a queen bee is all that you will see because everything else dies in the winter. So in the spring, a queen will emerge from the ground. They bury themselves under the ground. They tend to like south-facing, kind of sunny, warm slopes. They have mated the previous fall, and they're carrying sperm in a special structure called a spermatheca, so that they can release the sperm when they lay an egg. So when you're out in early spring and you see these giant bumblebees, because the queens are much bigger than the workers, flying around close to the ground, they're looking for nesting sites. And different species prefer different nesting sites, but there are many species that are looking for a rodent hole in the ground. They seem to really prefer rodent holes, but you can also find them in holes in trees. If you leave a flower pot upside down, undisturbed for a long period of time, they may go into the hole of the flower pot and make a nest in there. They prefer the rodent's nest because there's already some kind of lining in there. I set out bee boxes every year, and usually I get a couple of colonies in my bee boxes, basically just simple wooden boxes that have a bee-sized hole. So the queen emerges from the ground, and that's all there is. So she has to find a nesting site. She has a lot of work to do. She has to find a nesting site. She has to feed herself. She has no workers. So once she finds a nesting site, she starts to make wax. And she makes wax honey pots. And this is a honey pot. So she'll start gathering nectar and she'll fill up the honey pot. And she makes wax balls, which she's going to lay her eggs in. And depending upon the species, some species put pollen for the larvae right inside the ball of wax, and other species, they just lay it on top. So she does all that, and there may be bad weather. She may have to stay in the nest for a long time and drink out of her honey pot, but she will start laying eggs. And the little when the eggs hatch, the little larvae will start eating the pollen, and eventually some female workers will emerge. So she has laid eggs that she has actually fertilized. So she's released some of that sperm from the specialized organ and fertilized the eggs, and fertilized eggs all develop into females, and the females are workers. And if the weather's really cold, she may actually sit like a bird on top of her nest, and she can generate heat by uncoupling her muscles, her flight muscles from flying, and she can just basically shiver and generate heat that way and keep the colony warm. Eventually, some of the workers are ready to go out and start helping her. But for a while, she's still got to do a lot of work because there aren't enough workers initially for her to just let things go. Eventually, there's hopefully enough workers. The first ones to emerge are usually pretty small because they don't get as much food as those later in the season. And they go out and they start collecting nectar and pollen. And after a while, the queen can stay inside the nest and just continue to lay eggs. So this is what the little larvae look like. These are the pupae that are about to develop into adult bees. So the workers are considerably smaller than the queen. They're all females. And then towards the end of the season, she starts to produce reproductives. And she produces males by not fertilizing the eggs. So the males are all haploid and have identical genes basically to the queen. And she also produces new queens. And unlike honeybees, where the new queens are fed royal jelly, well, they are fed something, it's not really royal jelly because it doesn't have the same properties. It's not nearly as impressive as the royal jelly, but they do feed some kind of a protein that they produce, the workers produce in glands, and they basically spit out to feed. But the big difference really is that they eat about 3 times as much pollen as the workers. And so those queens and those males, the males basically leave the hive and forage and just feed and look for females to mate. And those new queens that are produced are going to be next year's queens.
Crazy. How about those male bumblebees? A lot of attention is paid to the female bees, but be you a queen or a worker. But the male bumblebees are really cool. They're bigger. They have an extra abdominal segment. They don't have a stinger. This is a photograph of our student, Brooke, who is, you may think, oh, she's so brave. Yeah, no, she's got a male bee on her finger, on her hand, and that bee's not going to sting. So he's just chilling, and we're taking really lovely pictures of her. They have big eyes, and then they also have a really good memory. They have good olfaction, they have great vision, and they have good memory. So they can see things really well. They can look for females. They can emit, some of the species release a pheromone to attract females. The guys with the big eyes, we would see them patrolling in our field sites. Some of them like to stand on a tall stalk of, say, a grass or some wildflower, and they're just kind of waiting, looking. So they're really interesting guys, and I'm hoping that you get a sense of how big they are, how much bigger they are, just from this picture here. Not only do they have that extra abdominal segment, but they also have really long legs. I'm not sure what's going on. I think,
Probably.
okay. Okay. Yeah, I've got water. Yeah, use mine. So I mentioned that they have bees. The bees have really good memories. They have good olfaction. They have good vision. They remember scents. They remember patterns. So they can go to the same spot if it was a rewarding kind of spot. Sometimes they hang around their nest. If there's a lot of good floral resources around their nest, they can hang around there. But they've been known to go as far as 10 kilometers away. So yeah, 6.2 miles for those of you who have run a 10K. Yeah, that's how far they can forage for food. And we've got two guys here. I think you've seen this picture before because it shows that honey ball, the pollen ball in the leg. So bumblebees can collect the pollen. They, Carol talked about the tongue length, and so they can collect nectar from them, grab pollen. But bumblebees do something special that few, if any other bees do it, but not a whole lot. And that's this thing called buzz pollination. There are certain flowers, think tomatoes, think blueberries and cranberries and eggplants and, potatoes. Their flowers are very, the plants are stingy. When you think of a daisy, all the pollen's right on top. It's free for all. Everyone can go there and eat the pollen. Just come and get it. But some of these other flowers are much more particular, and they kind of sequester their pollen in a compartment in the flower that's a lot harder to get. You can't just easily grab it. What bumblebees can do, though, is they can perform this act called buzz pollination, where they can, as Carol talked about, heating the nest when the queen has to heat the young in the nest in the colony. She can disassociate the flight muscles from her wings, and then they can vibrate. And that vibration can cause the pollen to fall from that flower. There's reports of vibrations as high as 24,000 vibrations per minute. That's 400 hertz. And I have a video. Tab. That's right. It was alt tab. Where's the alt? Alt tab.
It's
Okay.
not showing on the screen.
God damn it. Okay. Okay, wait, time out. Alt tab, and oh, come on, Don't want that.
Nope, it's not showing.
Still
Maybe
not.
we can just show it at the end if there's time.
I'll do that.
Or here comes our person.
Michael. Yay. Thank you. We were all tabbing, but no, it needs to go down a bit more. So if we could show a little bit of those two videos, that one just for a little bit so they can see the pollen coming out. Now, will I be able to scroll
There it
down to
is.
the next one?
There it is.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, so check this out. We don't see a bee here, but you could take a vibrator. You can take like a tuning fork, and put it up against there. And if it's the right frequency, it'll cause the flower to just unleash the pollen. And
You scroll down just a little bit.
yeah. And so that's a great visual that shows that. This shows the bee performing that. So you can see it, and it's called buzz pollination because you can actually hear it. We can't hear it because the sound's not hooked up, but you can hear the buzzing. It's really quite cool.
These flowers. Buzz pollen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, these guys. I mentioned the crops that were important for buzz pollinating, but we have shooting stars that are pollinated with buzz pollination, and pedicularis as well. These are wildflowers. So it ain't just the crops, it's wildflowers as well.
And now we're stuck.
Okay.
It's not going.
Okay, we'll do it that way.
Oh, there we go.
Good, good, good.
Okay. Before I mentioned Sphacodia as a parasitic bee, there are also parasitic bumblebees that we call cuckoo bumblebees or Cythrus bumblebees. And these are also parasites that only have reproductives. So this is a female cuckoo bumblebee. In fact, it's Cythrus or Bombus insularis, which is a local species. And they go into a colony that's already formed and already has workers, and they either kill or disable the queen. And they do that. They are heavily armored. You can see it's not nearly as fuzzy as some of the other pictures that you've seen. Very heavy exoskeleton compared to other bees. Really super strong mandibles and a tough sting compared to other bumblebees. And they just go in there and they kill the queen or disable her. And then they start laying eggs, and the workers are like, oh, well, we better take care of these eggs. And so just like, cowbirds. And these are some bumblebee mimics. So every time you see a bumblebee, you might want to look a little closer. These two are actually flies. And they are mimicking bumblebees to basically take advantage of the fact that bumblebees have stingers, and predators will learn to avoid them. How do you tell a fly from a bumblebee? The easiest thing is flies have 2 wings and bees have 4 wings. Lots of other differences, but that's the easy observable one.
So we hope we've given you a good sense of bees around here, a good sense of bumblebees. There's been a lot of news reports. It's really hard to escape them, honestly, of how pollinators are declining. And they're not just declining in one area, they're declining globally. And that has raised a lot of concerns, a lot of serious concerns that we might not have enough pollinators, and we might be facing a pollination crisis. The bumblebees that we study are also in decline. There's not only declines in the abundance, how many there are, there's shrinking of their territory, shrinking of their range size. And in some places, there have been reports of not ever finding that particular bumblebee species where there used to be some. So reports of local extinctions. If you think about the things that negatively impact bumblebees, it turns out that they're the same things that will probably negatively impact a lot of other species, not just bumblebees. So you think about availability of floral resources. If you don't have as many flowers, that could be bad not only for bumblebees, but for everything else that depends upon those flowers. So this is a bigger problem than just, oh, bumblebees are in decline. And just to clarify, honeybees were in decline. They were reported in decline in the early 2000s. They're no longer considered to be in decline. So they seem to have weathered that period of that dip. There are several bumblebees, about a quarter of them, that are thought to be at risk, seriously at risk. About 11 of the 40 some species in North America, north of Mexico, are thought to be at risk. We've listed a few of the names here. And these are just the bumblebee species. I don't know that I want to read of all of them, but so the thing to note is that some of these species have really widespread territories, like Bombus pennsylvanicus. It's called the eastern bumblebee or the American bumblebee. You get the sense that this was found all over the North American continent, and it is, or it was. Bombus occidentalis is the western bumblebee, also found along the western part of North America, and it's in in decline as well. That's what you see with very abundant or widely spread bumblebees, but you also see the declines in much more with bumblebees that have a much more restricted range. And you would expect that they would be more seriously impacted because they don't have there's not a lot of them spread all over. So it's not just the bumblebees that live in more restricted areas or are restricted in their territory, but it's also the widespread ones that are also declining.
Well, considering the audience that we have here, I'm sure that you're aware of this,
Yeah.
but loss of pollination services are going to affect the entire community because there's cascading effects. Pollinators are responsible for seed production, fruit production, and without those things, the fruits and seeds aren't there for the animals. Those also represent the future generations of plants. They provide food and shelter for organisms. And so when you lose pollinators, you can have this cascading effect within the whole community. And not only are there these cascading effects in communities, but there's economic reasons why we should, as well as aesthetic reasons why we should continue to protect pollinators so that we have them for future generations.
There are a few threats. I don't mean to trivialize it. There are several threats, I should say it like that. There are several threats that bumblebees face. And again, what's affecting bumblebees is probably affecting a whole suite of other different species. Climate change is one of them. The loss of their own natural habitat, just places where they normally live. The loss of that is also impacted bumblebees. There are pathogens and parasites that are in many cases introduced from other areas. If you have a small population of bees, you run the risk of having low genetic diversity, and that's been found in some species. And so I'm thinking of, okay, low genetic diversity, inbreeding, and there are some really serious adverse deleterious consequences when you have a lot of repeated inbreeding across generations. You know, if there's inbreeding for one generation, it might not be a big deal, but if it's repeated inbreeding, because you don't have a big population, that could be a problem. And then there's the risk of pesticides. So these threats are not separate. Most people agree that there's probably these interactive or synergistic kinds of effects with each of these things. There's a lot of work that's still being done, so one can't definitively say, there's still no definitive answer to all of these problems, but certainly there are individual problems, and not just that they're individual, but they work in tandem in some ways with one another. You take climate change. For the most part, the changes that we are seeing in our climate typically means you're seeing increased temperatures in places, you're seeing more drought in places, you're seeing more severe weather events. You know, to just think about California and more severe fires, early onset of the fire season, longer fire season. So these are things that are typically associated with climate change. The temperature, the increase in temperature has real direct effects on bumblebees. Specifically, it has direct effects on anything that is a cold-blooded animal. Think reptiles that are cold-blooded, think of insects that are cold-blooded. So these are ectothermic animals that derive their metabolic activity not from internal mechanisms like we have, but they depend on the outside temperature. And there's some really prominent direct effects that increased temperature or that temperature has on, in this case, bee activity. So increased temperatures can affect how often a bee can be going out. If it's too hot, it may not be able to. It can also affect the distribution of the bees. It can affect the home range of the bees. Remember that slide that showed where the bees, where bumblebees originated in the temperate climates? They they're not used to it being hot. So it can affect that distribution, like this, if it starts getting too hot in a certain place, they may have to move. Phenology refers to the life cycle changes. If things are warmer, maturing may occur at a faster rate. It also affects the growth duration. It affects their metabolic rate. So these are absolutely direct effects that have been seen in multiple studies across ectothermic animals. And then with respect to bees, there are indirect effects, not necessarily on the insects themselves, but on the resources that they depend on. So the plants are affected by rising temperatures. The quality of the food, how much pollen is made, how much nectar is made, that's also going to affect the bees. And then you can have shifts in parasites, maybe parasites that have more that are finding a more hospitable area because it's now warmer.
Until recently, we thought that pesticides were the really big problem, and I will talk about pesticides, but some very recent studies seem to indicate that climate change may be the key factor in insect declines and specifically in bumblebee declines. When temperatures start to increase in a particular area, there have been all kinds of studies done on heat tolerances of bumblebees. And they have, just like any animal, they have a certain range that they can optimize, that is optimal for them. But with increase in temperatures, bumblebees are in trouble. And there's several things that they can do. They could potentially acclimate. They could potentially change the phenology of the colony so that they emerge earlier. But the problem with that is the flowers may be out of sync with them because the flowers may not change their phenology at the same rate. They can evolve or they can change their range. And there have been some really big studies where people looked across North America and Europe and looked at over 5,000 records from the early 1900s up to the present, and used baseline data from 1900 to 1974, and then looked in increments subsequent to that, and have noticed what's actually going on. And the pattern seems to be that there's a loss of range from the southern distributions, there's a shift to higher elevations, and there's a failure to disperse to higher latitudes. So they're not evolving rapidly enough to compensate. In terms of changing their phenology, this has been studied, and only 6 out of 21 bumblebee species were actually able to emerge a little earlier, but still ran into those problems of not being in sync with the flowers. And the big pattern seems to be these changes in range distribution because the bees can't evolve fast enough.
So they're having a constriction in their range. Their southern distribution is no longer hospitable, and they haven't moved further north.
And this is Bombus occidentalis, the western bumblebee that Deanna mentioned a moment ago. Its range has decreased dramatically. It used to be all across the West. And there have been studies specifically on that species, and it seems to be the key factor. It's not pesticides, it's not any of these other things that we've mentioned, but not being able to adapt to increasing temperatures.
If that weren't bad enough, there's been a lot of changes in the environment. A lot of it is human caused, but even if it weren't, when the pictures that we have here, certainly human caused changes. But when bees don't have enough of their natural habitat, they don't have enough flowers, they don't have enough places for nesting sites, they don't have a place where they can overwinter. Remember, the queens have to overwinter in the soil. And certainly the cityscape that you see in the top left there, it's been paved over. What's the Joni Mitchell song?
Paved paradise.
Paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Okay, so maybe not a parking lot, but a whole mess of highways there, and buildings. And then new house construction. It's quite uniform. What's really striking is that there's very few flowers. And that's what bees like. They need flowers. So you see grass, and grass isn't going to provide that. The right-hand picture shows a planted strip of flowers along a highway, that could provide some resources for them. So the loss of natural habitat plays a huge role because of loss of food resources and overwintering sites and nesting sites. Parasites have been introduced in many cases for commercial reasons. So Bombus occidentale is that western bumblebee. Because it can do buzz pollination so well, it was brought in to do greenhouse pollination of tomatoes, and they were raised in colonies, and parasites got involved, so to speak. And I've got 4 types of parasites here. 3 of them are fairly small. There are mites. Mites are external parasites. They tend to eat the wax. They tend to eat honey. They don't necessarily kill a bee unless it's got a really heavy load of those parasites, and or there just aren't enough resources for them. And so they're weakened by lack of food. And then the mites can actually kill them. It's not in the best interest of the mites to kill their host, but if the bumblebee is weakened, that's what's going to happen. Crithidia, I don't have a photograph of that. Crithidia is an intestinal parasite. It results in the bumblebee not being able to distinguish if a flower has nectar or not. So the bee forages very inefficiently and ends up dying, basically slowly starving to death. Nosema is an intracellular parasite. It affects the kidneys and it prevents effective digestion. And so what ends up happening is you have these worker bees that they can't mature effectively. So they aren't able to work the colony the way they're supposed to go work. They can't go and forage effectively. So the colony can collapse because of that. The colony can also die with Crithidia. The bottom picture is a canopid fly. And okay, we had a really cool video that showed what canopid flies do, but the video link is dead and we can't find it elsewhere. But I will tell you what it does. This fly will fly around, and they're relatively small compared to a bumblebee, and they can inject their ovipositor and lay eggs inside the bumblebee. And so you can imagine, there's a picture here. You can imagine this fly buzzing around and then kind of hitting this little
right in
this
between
bumblebee
the
here.
segments.
Yeah, in between the segments. It's just like a little shot. It doesn't last a long time. But a few days later, the eggs hatch inside the bumblebee. Yeah. And that's the video we wanted to show you. They hatch inside the bumblebee and they basically kill it from the inside out. The larvae
eat it from the inside
They
out.
eat it. I know, it's gross. Nature, red in tooth and claw. Yucky. And it's worth a good story. So even though we didn't have the video, I wanted to share that story with you. Now you won't sleep at night.
Deanna already mentioned genetic diversity. There have been studies that have shown that the bumblebees that are in the worst decline actually have fairly low genetic diversity. And the problem with that is inbreeding and all the effects associated with inbreeding, but it can result in what's called an extinction vortex. So if you start out with a small population and multiple small populations that are fairly closely related to each other, and they start inbreeding with each other, there's going to be some die-off, there's going to be some problems, there's going to be some unhealthy bees, and that makes even smaller populations. So an extinction vortex is this idea that you get this spiraling effect as colonies get smaller and smaller and smaller because of low genetic diversity, which has been demonstrated in many of these bee species in decline. And then pesticides. And as I said earlier, we thought for a long time that pesticides were the really big problem. And the one that was widely used and was very detrimental to many types of insects were this group of pesticides called neonicotinoids that were being widely used. And here are some of the nasty effects of what neonicotinoids can do in terms of killing bees directly or decreasing their foraging, their food intake, lowering their survival. But I'm happy to say that the city of Boulder, and specifically the group Be Safe in Boulder, is anybody here involved with Be Safe? Yay. We're very instrumental in getting neonicotinoids banned or highly restricted. There are still some exceptions, but highly restricted in the city of Boulder in 2015. And the state of Colorado followed suit in 2024. There are no federal restrictions on the use of neonicotinoids, but there are several states now that have made major restrictions in their use, and that's going to help a tremendous amount.
So Carol and I, in the early 2000s, decided, we should look at and see what the bee situation is like in Boulder County. Boulder County has a huge range of different kinds of terrain. We've got, grasslands at 5,000 feet, and there's, all the way up to like 11,000 feet. So that we have the potential to look at a whole mess of different areas. And we ended up performing 3 different types of experiments. We looked at Boulder County grasslands, and we were looking at all bees in this case. We were looking at plots. We looked at 20 plots, and we were looking at plots that were close to urban areas versus plots that were more remote. We wanted to see if there was an effect between degree of urban or degree of remoteness. We also looked at the grazing regimen. We published those results. I'll tell you, I'm going to summarize all the results in the next slide. When we completed that first study, we said, let's look at bumblebees. The first study was on all these bees and flies, and there are a lot of them. And it was really hard for all of us, for us and our team, to identify every one of them. So we relied on experts to help us. And we said, let's do the second study where we can do it all. Because we got 23 species of bumblebees, we can identify those bumblebees. And just so you're not feeling really horrible about what we did, the first year we probably caught a whole lot of bees and kept them. But after that, we could identify them in the field and let them go. So if you were worried about massive death because of exuberant studying, rest assured, we let them go. We actually needed permission from Boulder County Parks and Open Space. We're going to tell them, no, we're letting these, especially the queens, we're letting the queens go. So anyway, we did a bumblebee study as our second study, and in the bumblebee study, we looked at bumblebees at lower elevations, the grasslands at 5,000 feet, and then mid-mountain grasslands at about 8,000 feet, and then higher elevation, like more alpine tundra. And then we did, as our last study, an agricultural study where we looked at the bees in close to organic farms, the bees close to the farms that were using more conventional techniques, and then revegetated plots. And in a very quick summary, what we found supported a lot of other studies. Basically, bee abundance and diversity, regardless of which study you're looking at, was really tied to floral diversity and abundance. We found more bees where there were more flowers. Grazing, interestingly, reduces floral abundance. That's not so interesting. We know that. Grazing reduces floral abundance, and consequently, it has a negative impact on bee diversity because there's fewer flowers. Boulder County has this huge amount of wild land, and we think that that amount of wild land is what's allowed so many different species to persist. In fact, when we did a comparison of the species diversity in our plots in 2009 versus the work that was done by Theodore Cockrell, who was a professor at the university in the early 1900s, we found 110 species versus Cockrell, who found 116. That's
bad.
Not bad at all. That's really a good thing. And we have a picture here of us working with our students, which is a perfect segue for.
We've had student teams working with us every summer, but our very first summer, we've had 34 different students working with us, and they were involved in both lab work, learning to identify, learning how to properly pin and mount insects, and also working in the field. And they were supported by all kinds of grants, many of which you'll see in our acknowledgements.
Yes, but these students were awesome. And we did this over, multiple years, and we think we helped them out. We think we gave them good skills. I mean, this is a job basically, and they were on time. They were diligent. There was one gal, Laura, who hated going out in the field. And she did not want to go out in the field and was like, that's cool. You don't have to. You can enter data. That was her thing. She loved to enter data. So we provided students the opportunity to see if they liked field work, see if they liked, working out with insects or going outside and hiking and whatnot. As you can see that our students did a lot of, when they grew up, they're doing a lot of different things. We have at least 2 faculty members at 2 different universities and a whole mess of other stuff. So
we would like you to learn to identify some local bumblebees. And I also would like to tell you about some opportunities that you can get involved in. There is a National Bumblebee Watch, if anybody's interested in monitoring bumblebees. And you're going to say, well, how can I identify them? We'll get to that. There is a native bee project out of CSU that you can get involved with. And the CU Museum is currently looking for volunteers on campus. Actually, the CU Museum is looking for volunteers to enter data. So they have thousands of bee specimens, and all of the recent ones the data has been digitized, but there are specimens from the very early 1900s, and they have not yet been digitized. So they're looking for data entry people. And basically you can do it from home if you have a computer and an internet connection. So that's something that you might be interested in getting involved in. So how do you identify local bee species? Well, I can recommend the Bumblebees of Colorado, a pictorial identification and information guide. And this was produced out of the CU Museum. It is online and you can download it. I only put plates of female workers up here, but there are also plates of males, which sometimes look a little bit different, and sometimes the queens look a little bit different. So that is an excellent resource. You could carry those pages out in the field, but we also have bee cards.
We have bee cards.
And these are little bee cards that you can carry around in your pocket or your wallet, so that when you're out looking at flowers and you see a bumblebee on them, you can identify those
I'm going to get them
bees.
when I can see, because it's pretty dark up here. But look, wait, go back a bit.
Okay.
Go back to the plate, to the pictures. Okay, so you've got this and you're looking at it and you're going, overwhelming. Sure. But the first thing you say is, hey, wait. Some of them have orange. That's a good thing to note. We can, discuss where the orange is, but some of them have orange, some of them do not. Some of them have white. If you look at Bombus appositus, I don't know if you can read that. Is that appositus? Yeah, it's appositus. If you look at Bombus appositus, it's got a really clear head. It's a white head. There's a lot of white fur on the head. And then you look at Bombus, where are we? There he is. Occidentalis, the western bumblebee, he's got a white butt. So you can look for white. You can look for brown. Griseocolus has a brown band. And then if you get really, you see them a lot and you get kind of familiar with them, you can look for other distinguishing characteristics. But for right now, we're going to try to make this easy.
Well, I thought if you gave them the cards, they could identify these pretty pictures.
Well, we could do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. It's just, we're going to need more light, especially if they're going to look at the card.
That would be
Yeah,
great.
let's do that.
Okay, so we'll give you all a bumblebee card. And then our first picture here, oh, but it's not going to be easy to see the picture once the cards are out. So we'll
I keep
put out the
these,
light.
we keep it in our purse. And then we go to a greenhouse, like flower bin. Oh, I'm going to give everyone. Even if you don't want one, you're going to get one, and then you can give them away. I had my students laminate them. Sure, you go on that side, and I'll go on this side.
Do you like this lighting now? Or do you want more or less? I put a little
Can
bit
you
on.
can you
A
pass
little
one
bit
down?
less so that the picture, we can see the picture, but so they can still look at their
I'm
cards
going to
to
give you. I'm
identify
going to
the
give you
bee.
2, and you can pass one down. And I'll give you 1, and I'll give you 1, and 1, and you're going to get one. Don't you worry. You're going to get one. There you go. You cannot. Yeah, I know you do. Oh, yay. Okay. How are you?
Okay, so now that you have your cards or are about to get your card, I want you to identify this bumblebee. And what you should note is there's orange, black, but it's a little hard to see because of the lighting here, but it's got a white butt. Who are we looking at? So
The butt is on the bottom.
So we have 3 parts: head,
Thank you.
thorax, and abdomen. And when I say butt, I'm talking about the last segment of the abdomen. Occidentalis.
Yay. I'm sorry? Yes.
Correct.
Occidentalis.
Okay. Now, how about this one? We've got a very light colored thorax and a very golden abdomen. And most of the abdomen is golden. Yes.
A positus. A positus. Nice.
Okay. And how about this one? We've got a very yellow thorax with a black dot in its center. And then most of the abdomen is yellow with a black tip.
I heard it over here.
I heard it, but I heard 2 things.
Nevadensis. Yeah.
Nevadensis.
Nevadensis. And those suckers are big. The queens are like an 1.5 inches. You go out in the field and you hear this thing. It sounds like a plane. And you go, oh my God. It's just, and I'm serious.
You can hear them coming.
You can hear them coming. It's outrageous. You feel like if they hit you, they'd knock you down.
Okay. That was
The one with the
Nevadensis.
black dot is Nevadensis. It's with the black dot. Yeah.
Okay. Now this one, black head with a little patch of yellow, but the thorax has almost a T. There's a area here, but then there's kind of a stripe going down the thorax. And then yellow and orange. Bifarious. See, you guys are experts already.
You are. We're going to start a new project. We're going to hire you.
And I think this is the last one that we have.
No, there's one more.
One more. Okay.
Maybe not.
So, all right. I'll just point this time because you're all experts here now. Look at that right there. Right here. No. Griseocolus.
Griseocolus. Yeah, this picture, it's not the best.
You can,
It's
what I was trying to point out here was this kind of this brownish stripe near the top of the abdomen. Griseocolus.
think there's one more. Yeah, there is one
There
more.
is one more. Okay, this one, I want you to look at the thorax. Remember, there's head, thorax, abdomen, and it's a little bit different than some of the other ones. It's kind of two-tone. So instead of having a big dot in the center like Navidentis did, we've got yellow in the front and black in the back of the thorax. I think I heard it. Yes.
Yes.
Pennsylvanicus. Well, what you have to do is go to the flower bin or someplace where there's
Yeah.
lots and lots of flowers and carry your little bee card with you. Okay, and the last quiz is, which one is a bumblebee?
A bumblebee.
Yes.
Nicely done.
Do you know what that is? A fly. And how about that? One of those bees that carries pollen, leafcutter bee, carries the pollen on its belly. Okay, and thank you for coming to our talk on the bumblebee. Thank you.
Will you take some questions?
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So any here, somebody in the back in the green? Hold on. Here.
Thank you so much. This was super interesting. I was wondering if you could speak to why these species are having trouble shifting their distribution at further north to higher latitudes, if that has to do with the composition of flowers that are there, or just habitat barriers, or competition with other species that are already local to the area.
The main thing seems to be that colonization rates are really, really low. They don't move really long distances from season to season. And so it's just very hard to get established in a new area. So over time, it's possible that they could start moving, but they haven't done it yet. And that's with data, going back for a very long time. So.
Sandra, do you have a question from the Zoomers?
We do. Amy, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thank you. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering how big of a problem pathogen spillover is from managed bees to bumblebees. I'm thinking particularly of viruses.
There's been quite a bit of work done looking at spillover from honeybees to bumblebees.
Mhm.
And most of the pathogens can be transmitted in the laboratory, but it doesn't seem to be a really significant problem in the wild. Now, you may have some additional.
I thought we should mention that in a lot of cases, people who do not take, beekeepers who are not as diligent in taking care of their bees might promote the growth of some of those pathogens, Nosema or the Varroa mites or something like that. It requires really careful attention to your beehive, the physicality of it, and it requires a lot of cleaning. So there have been reports of not only the bees suffering from it, but also spilling over into some native bees.
And the biggest problem has been when people have raised commercial colonies of bumblebees to pollinate in greenhouses and bees have gotten loose. Many of those captive bees had parasites and started spreading them to wild populations.
I mean, those commercial hives, I mean, they move across the country.
We have another question here in the audience.
I have a xeriscaped yard in Louisville, And my problem, I do have bees, but I have wasps. And I'm not sure what to do about them. I've gotten rid of the wasp nest under my shutter, so now I've gotten rid of them, but my neighbors have wasps and they, they come over to my yard and eat my bees.
Oh, I don't know about, we have wasps too. We have paper wasps, but I don't see wasps flitting around the landscaping. We try to do maybe not xeriscaping as much, but we try to plant native, native-ish flowering plants in our landscaping. So I'm not sure that I really have an answer to that.
Yeah.
There's someone behind you who's had her
We'll
hand up.
go to the Zoomers, though. We go back and forth.
Oh, I'm
Sandra?
sorry.
Yeah, Sandra, do you have another?
Yes, Vicky, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. I'm curious if you could explain to us how to make bumblebee boxes so that they could build houses in my yard.
Yeah, I don't have the dimensions off the top of my head, but basically I use plywood and I make a box that's yay big with a removable lid and a hole that's just about the size of a bumblebee, and put some cotton or some moss like you might put in a reptile cage, and just put that in the bottom and then leave it in a place where there's lots of flowers.
Karen,
And-
can you give a rough idea of the dimensions because they can't see you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd say about 6 by 8 is probably about right, and then maybe 6 inches tall, and a hole about the size of a bumblebee. I've put some at ground level because they're a ground nesting species, and I've put some up higher, like on a tree trunk or something like that. And I've actually had multiple times had colonies in my living room. So basically what I would do is once I captured a colony, a queen got it started, I'd usually wait till she had several workers, and then I'd close the lid, put a cork in the hole, bring it into the house. And I had a special board with holes in it and a little tube, so they just fly in and out. And the first time I did this, they had a little trouble finding the plexiglass tube to get back into the house. So I ended up painting like bullseyes on the wooden slat that the hose went through. And then boom, they could just find their way right back immediately. But then I had a plexiglass lid, so I could just pull the lid up. And in fact, I had a picture earlier when I was talking about the bee reproduction. I had a picture of a colony, and you saw the little honey pot. That was one of the colonies that was in my living room.
And when you do that, do you have the hole facing up or facing horizontally?
Horizontally, yeah.
Uh-huh. I have another question here, I think. What?
This would be going back to the image of the origin of the bees in Eurasia and then their subsequent migration. Do you have an idea of the time frame of how long ago bees originated and then how long it would have taken them to populate other continents?
I don't have a good sense of that.
I don't either.
I'm sorry, I don't really have a good sense of that.
Sandra?
We have a question here in the chat about if there's an app you like for identifying bees. Thanks for the cards. We did find a PDF of that for those of us on the Zoom, but do you have any favorite tools, phone kind of tools?
There are a number of apps that you can get on your phone for identifying insects, but the problem with those is they're not always 100% right, but it gives you a starting point.
So when we did our class in the spring at Chatfield, we had people who had, I think they had photocopied them. They didn't
Laminated.
they didn't bring their book, but they photocopied and laminated that sheet, these sheets.
And this is a whole book about bumblebees of Colorado, and you can download the whole thing online. It's online.
I have it on my phone. I mean, it's a pain in the butt to, if you're like, oh, what is this bee? Like, you'll never find it in time. But laminating the pages and then, you can fold them. I thought that was a brilliant idea. So.
And it's specific to Colorado too.
Yeah, and it's specific to Colorado.
Any other questions in the room? Here. I'll bring you the mic.
I have two questions. Do bumblebees convert nectar to honey, or do they just store the nectar in those wax pots?
So those little wax pots, if you were to drink that, it would taste like honey, but it's the size of a thimble.
So do they actually convert the nectar into
Yeah.
honey like
They
like
concentrate it,
honeybees
yeah.
do? They do. Okay. And then where can we find your publications?
All right, let's see. Where's that sucker?
These large egos, what are you going to do?
We didn't bring any with us.
All right, so they're in the Journal of Insect Conservation. If you look at Kearns and Oliveras,
Yeah, Google Scholar. And I've also written or co-written 3 books, one about pollination and 2 about bumblebees. So they're out there. One of them's a kid's book.
Sandra, back to you.
We have some suggestions of resources from the chat. Steve, would you like to share those? Maybe the room folks would like to see what we're seeing.
Yeah, if you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Armstead with the Xerces Society. Just wanted to also pass along that fun app to play with is the Bee Machine. So you can access it just if you Google Bee Machine, or it's called beemachine.ai if you add it into your search engine. And that's, again, it's AI and based off of photos, but it's fairly accurate, and it's always curious to see what it comes up with. And I know it was mentioned earlier, Bumblebee Watch, if you do put your photos into that app too, it actually has some ability to help you identify, and they've got some good resources. And then I think the other one I would just always suggest is iNaturalist as well. If you're a participant at iNaturalist, you often can use their search engine to help you identify as well. So those are some resources I might recommend.
Thank you. I meant to mention iNaturalist. That's
Steve, thank you so much. But let me clarify, was the first thing called Bee Machine?
Yes, Bee Machine, B-E-E Machine. Yep.
Okay. Sandra, I think back to you. Any Zoom questions?
I don't see any more. Zoomers, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask?
Any questions from the room? Well, thank you so. Did you have one?
So I thought the life cycle part was really interesting, and I'm curious about the pacing of fertilization, and like it seemed like it was selective fertilization to save some to make queens later in the season. Is that instinctual? What are the general ratios of a colony?
so. So the queen fertilizes all the females, all the workers are from fertilized eggs. And so most of the eggs that she produces are going to be fertilized. It's only towards the end of the season that she basically turns off or plugs that spermatheca and produces males as well as queens who are reproductives. And it's a seasonal thing. So it's kind of like the timing of the season, which is another piece of the whole phenology of the colony that can get completely thrown off by changes in climate.
Any other last questions? Well, thank you so much. This was very interesting. I think everybody really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.